Here we are standing at the gate of the former German Nazi concentration camp, Stutthof. It is today a museum of martyrdom. Through this gate, 110,000 people as inmates, prisoners, entered, of which 65,000 people lost their lives. But it didn't start here. The route to their martyrdom started some meters away from here at the train station, the narrow gauge railway station, at the corner of this little street. That was one of the means of transportation of the inmates to the concentration camp, which is a museum today. Somewhere around here was the narrow gauge railway stop. From the train, the inmates were made march to the main gate. We're standing in front of the sign saying Stutthof. It means we're just about to enter Stutthof Museum, which was, by the way, founded in 1962. Let us go. After entering the gate today, coming into the museum, the first stop is by this little building. During the Second World War, it was the SS guardhouse. Today, it is a little bookstore where one can buy many very well-prepared editorials, but also order the guiding service to walk around the museum with the certified guide. Today, we are straight going to the map, the plan of the museum, so that we could see it overall. Let us go. The map shows the concentration camp of Stutthof as of the 31st December 1945. The overall area of the camp was at that time 120 hectares. Today, the museum compounds comprise of about a little bit more than 20 hectares. What we are going to see during our tour, the old camp, part of the new camp, the crematory and the gas chamber. We shall talk about the places on the way. This big building today houses the management of the museum, the library, archives, publishing place, and also the offices of the historians. But during the Second World War, it housed the headquarters of the concentration camp commandment. It is good to remember when walking around the museum that we have some practical information on the way. There are some boards in 3 languages, the English, the German and the Polish, giving us short information about the certain building, certain object, but also advising us how to do the sightseeing, 1.3 and so on and so on. So this is the practical information. The building, which does not exist today, here was the political department, as you can see on this board. It is not existing because in 1945 the Nazis were destroying the evidence. That means they destroyed also the building. Why was it important? Because the lists of transported inmates were prepared here. Death penalties were decided here. There's sentences. Also the numbers were assigned to the inmates who later on entered the camp through the death gate. This barrack served during the Second World War as the canteen. It means that the inmates could buy stationery, soap, a little bit of the toothpaste or so. Today, it houses the soles of shoes. The number of the soles is about 500,000, or 500,000. The question is, well then, 110,000 went through the inmates, the prisoners, during the Second World War. All those soles come from the shoes that were brought here for being repaired. And also maybe with the other inmates that were transported from the other concentration camps. Later on in 1945, at the beginning of 1945, the shoes might have been the shoes of the refugees from the East Prussia during the attack of the Red Army. After getting the number at the political department, the inmates had to stand in a row for quite a long time, despite the weather, in front of this building. This was the administration building, today one of the buildings of the museum. This is where they got registered, but also could get the punishment, like the punishment of the bunker. This is one of the so-called bunkers. This one has no windows. How could a prisoner get here? How could a prisoner get to the bunker? For example, for trying to send a letter home. Sometimes the punishment lasted 14 days, sometimes 1 day. It depends. So here were the cells where the prisoners could be arrested for any reason, but also they could be sentenced to the punishment of flogging. It was taking place here. The entrance to the main compound of the concentration camp led through the death gate. 110,000 people went through that gate, of which 65,000 lost their life in the camp. And while walking here today in the museum, we're going to learn the thorough history of this place, where there is a short history lesson in the barrack of the former quarantine. Don't be surprised that we don't have many barracks here around, not many buildings. As it was said while we were standing in front of the political department, the Nazis in 1945 were trying to destroy the evidence. I must say that quite successfully. We're in the building of the quarantine. It means that between a week or two until a month of a time, they newly brought prisoners into the camp during the war were kept here to learn their number in German, to pronounce it in German, to learn how to march, how to present the drill, and so on and so on. In general, they were learning their life in the concentration camp. But today, this building houses the exposition of the genesis of this place. It means the concentration camp of Stutthof did not explode just like that. It was the consequence of the political events in the free city of Danzig, which is quite an interesting map here, with the city of Gdańsk, today's Gdańsk, around here, which was created, it was a political creation after the First World War, as the consequence, as the result of the Treaty of Versailles. So this barrack shows the history, the genesis, the political events that happened in this area and finally led to the German Nazi attack on Poland, thus starting the Second World War. It's worth remembering that the concentration camp in Stutthof was the first German Nazi concentration camp created outside Germany. More or less the first days of the Second World War in this region, the first arrests, who, when, and so on, some statistics, everything legible because in German, English, and Polish languages. During the existence of the camp in Stutthof, there were two commanders only. During the commandment of the first commander, Max Pauli, the camp of Stutthof underwent transformation from the rather local internment place, camp, into the state concentration camp. It happened when this person visited the camp. One can see this during the tour because there is a quite detailed photographic information about the visit of Heinrich Himmler, which resulted in turning Stutthof into the state concentration camp in 1942, in January. As it was mentioned before, the place for Stutthof concentration camp was chosen on purpose. The map shows it clearly. Here is the Gulf of Gdańsk, which is a part of the Baltic Sea. Here is the Vistula lagoon, and here is the marshy land, which is the delta of the Wisła River, the lowlands, we call them Żuławy. The place far from everywhere. It was also called a place in the middle of nowhere, and therefore it was very difficult to successfully escape from here. There is only one registered, historically, successful escape from the camp in the whole history of 2,077 days of existing of the camp. In the last part of the former quarantine building, today housing the history exhibition, we can find the development of Stutthof concentration camp from the small camp through the development of the so-called old camp with the construction of the new camp, ending up with 1944 and the area of 120 hectares of the German Nazi concentration camp in all. When looking at the map, we sometimes don't realize the area. So it is good to come to the last room of this exhibition to see the model of the camp as of December 1944. 120 hectares. We just left the quarantine barrack with the history of the camp, and we are just about to enter the next one of the first barracks built in Stutthof concentration camp between 1939 and 1940. Today we call it the women's barrack, because the first females were transported here in 1940, and they were kept here, hence the name. Let us get in. The prisoners kept here in the camp of Stutthof came from more than 20 countries, which are marked here on the map. There were also more than 20 nationalities that were imprisoned here. We know about them a little bit, I couldn't say a lot, but quite a lot, from the informational cards that are kept in our archives. After being assigned with the number and being registered at the administration block. At the beginning of the existing of the camp, the inmate got a cardboard with the number written on it. Later on, during the further years of existence of the camp, the numbers were printed on the piece of cloth. They were not tattooed on the forearm of the inmates. The signs, the triangles with the special marks, were unanimous to every German concentration camp, everywhere in German-occupied Europe. And also, from 1942, the uniforms were introduced, the striped uniforms, the dresses and the scarf for the women, and the slacks and the coats for the men. And instead of shoes, the clogs were worn. So far, touring, walking in the museum, we had the facts, the history, the numbers. Dry facts. We didn't have people. Here, in this room of the barrack, we can find some portraits. We can look into the eyes of the inmates, but more, we can look into their souls and read the messages, as we have something extremely precious here. The column with some messages stating the dates, some scribed initials of the names of the inmates. This is the message from them then to us now. But we also have another kind of message. We have letters, personal letters, like for example this one written by a young boy to his mother. My beloved mom. It was the letter written in 1944, where he writes that together with the other 20 inmates, he was called to the wardroom, and he expected the death sentence. Just for the information, he survived. We have many letters like that in the archives, but we have something more. We have the artistic performances, which is not only the archives of the theaters, secret, illegal theaters, but also what was done and made by the inmates. The postcards with the wishes, some combs, rosaries, spoons, and also portraits of the friends imprisoned here, which is also kind of a message to us. In each of the barracks there were 12 rooms called Stube. Each of them was about of 50 square meters. It is said in the archives that there were about 150 to 200 inmates in one room. Usually, statistically, there were more pushed inside. The people slept on bunk beds, which were in the rooms. They were not allowed to use them during the day. The day started very early in the morning and ended about 10 in the evening with a breakfast, midday meal, and the supper. Before the camp hospital was built, the infirmary was held here in the women's barrack. Here we can see the first aid room, as well as the gynecological chair, which was used not only for the childbirth, but also for examination whether somebody had valuables hidden or not. In this little infirmary, also the operation room was organized. As you can see, the tools, as you can see, the hygiene, the conditions, compare it to today. Until 1942, the bathroom was organized in the center of the old camp. Later on, each of the bathrooms were organized in every barrack. But the water flow was very slow, there was nearly no pressure, and it was available only twice a day. And so twice a day was available the toilet, where the inmates could use it in the morning and in the evening only. 3 meals a day. Breakfast, consisting of the watery cereal coffee, no sugar. Bread baked of not the best quality flour, with some margarine, sometimes marmalade. Midday meal, we wouldn't call it dinner, consisting of the watery soup, no fat, sometimes rotten or frozen vegetables, and the evening meal, which we call today a supper, similar to the breakfast. It was not like today that we sit at the table, we get our meal on a beautiful tableware. The inmates got the meal dropped into the bowls like we have today, and they had to hurry because it was one bowl for several people, no spoons, no forks, no luxury. Also no washing the tableware, as we call it. Therefore, this was also the place which spread the diseases. Diarrhea was the main disease. What about the calories? Normally working, hard-working, physically working person should get about 4,500 calories a day. How was it in the concentration camps, including Stutthof? It was between 600 and 1,000 calories at the best. The end of the earthly route of martyrdom for the prisoners of the concentration camps, among them Stutthof, was the crematory. The building of the crematory was built in 1942, first for one furnace, then for the additional 2 furnaces. Altogether there were 3. The crematory was working so hard that the building burned. The next one was built only to be destroyed in 1945, in the time of destroying the evidence. The building that is behind me was built when the museum was created to house also the exhibitions. Inside one can find the furnaces that survived the destruction, and also the story about 2 evacuations. One was the land evacuation of January 1945, and the second one was the sea evacuation of April 1945. Worth seeing. In the neighborhood of the crematory, in the year of 1943, the gas chamber was built, also in the near vicinity of the railway tracks. Here, first, the clothes were disinfected. Then, Cyclone B was used to gas people. In 1944, from June till October, more than 1,300 people were gassed here, mostly Jews from all around Europe. Here is the empty field where the new camp existed from 1943 until 1945, when it was destroyed in the destruction of the evidence of existence. After the Second World War, when the museum was created, the plinths with the numbers of the barracks were built to indicate how many barracks stood in the new camp. In 1944, during the extension of the camp, the new kitchen was built. It was big enough, it was created in the center of the extended camp, and it was built big to equip with meals about 100,000 inmates. In fact, it was never used as a kitchen, but it was used, the building of the kitchen was used as the temporary quarters for Jewish inmates in 1944. In 1944, a Jewish camp was built within Stutthof concentration camp. It was meant for 16,000 Jewish women from all around Europe. At the same time, Stutthof concentration camp was brought into the European Nazi action of mass murder of the Jewish population of Europe. This Jewish camp in Stutthof ceased existing in April 1945, when the SS troops fleeing from here burned the camp together with the sick and dying Jewish women and some inmates hiding in the attic. Today we have the memorial monument here. We walked about 10 minutes from the main camp to get to the forest, to the pyre, which we call the Holocaustal stake. What was it? It's a memorial today, but it was created, erected, in late 1944 and the beginning of 1945, when the big epidemics of typhoid struck the concentration camp in Stutthof. To relieve the crematories, the stake was built here. And we have the memoirs of one of the inmates, who was the Italian diplomat, Aldo Corradello. He wrote, "On a big truck, the corpses were brought from the camp to the big site outside the barbed wire. Today, it takes about 10 minutes of a walk. There, a huge stake was quickly erected, tar was poured on the wood, and this way, 1,000 corpses could be burned during one night to relieve the crematory. In January 1945, this stake burned almost every third night. Some of the ashes from the stake were placed after the Second World War in the memorial, the museum memorial monument in the center of the camp. On the 9th of May, 1945, the troops of the Red Army entered the camp. They found about 100 inmates, plus several thousand of the refugees from the East Prussia, and no Wehrmacht troops, as they left the day before. Right after 9th of May, the collection of the evidence, which was still available, started. It led to the trials. There were two main trials held in Gdańsk before the court in Gdańsk. Both ended with death sentences. Among the sentenced to death and executed was the commander of the Jewish camp in Stutthof. However, none of the two commanders of the whole camp were sentenced for Stutthof. The first commander of the camp was executed, but only for the war crimes in the Neuengamme concentration camp, where he was a commander after 1942. The second one fled, was found in Germany, and was trialed in Germany, and he got the sentence of only 9 years. He was of prison. He was released 18 months before the end of the sentence. He died in 1970s. In 1960s, the museum was created, and in the end of 1960s, the monument was built. The monument, which is the memorial to all that went through this trial of martyrdom of the Stutthof concentration camp, with a very touching sentence here, which says, "Should the people go silent, let the stones cry out."